From sauce to soup to ketchup, sun-dried, roasted, or even raw, the tomato can liven up pretty much any dish. But that was not always the case. So today we are going to make an early Italian tomato recipe from the 18th century called pomodori farciti alle erbette, tomatoes stuffed with herbs. Then we'll take a look at how the once vilified tomato made its way into grocery stores around the world, this time on Tasting History. Today's recipe comes from Il Cuoco Galante, or The Gallant Cook, by Vincenzo Corrado, first published in the Kingdom of Naples in 1773. Now, it's not the first European cookbook to use tomatoes in recipes, but it is the first that uses them in ways that we would associate with modern Italian cuisine. So, since this is an Italian dish, go ahead and pour a glass of fine Italian wine, or in my case, decent Californian wine, and let's get started. Tomatoes stuffed with herbs. Mince parsley, onion, sorrel, and mint, add ham, season with salt and pepper, add egg yolk and grated provatura, stuff the mixture into the tomatoes, fry them, and serve them with ham broth. First, thank you to my friend Francesco Vitellini who helped me translate that. I would have been lost without him, especially when I get to the ham broth part. And frankly, I don't know what ham broth is, and I don't really want to make ham broth right now, so I'm just going to do the stuffed tomatoes. Now, the amounts of each ingredient that you're going to need for this recipe are going to vary depending on the size of your tomatoes and how many you want, so you're going to kind of have to eyeball it. What you'll need is several small tomatoes. You don't want the big beefsteak ones, but you also don't want like tiny little heirloom ones. Those are going to be too hard to stuff, so something in the middle. Italian parsley, onion, sorrel. Now, if you have trouble finding sorrel, and if you live in the United States, you're probably going to have trouble finding sorrel, like I did, go ahead and use either arugula or chard, which is what I ended up using, or really any kind of bitter green is going to do the trick. We make do. Mint, prosciutto, egg yolks. It's going to be about 1 egg yolk to every 1.5 or 2 tomatoes, depending on the size. Provatura, which is a fresh cheese made from either cow or buffalo milk, also might be hard to find in the United States, so go ahead and use a fresh mozzarella. It'll do the trick. And then just a bit of salt and pepper and olive oil for frying. So to get started on the filling, mince your parsley, sorrel, or whatever green you're using, your mint, and the onion, and mix them in a bowl together. Then either chop or tear up your prosciutto into small pieces and mix that in along with a bit of salt and pepper. Then grate in a liberal amount of cheese and drop in your egg yolks and mix everything together until it forms a paste. Super easy and super quick, which is great because that'll give us time to see how the star of our dish made its way onto menus worldwide. Now, tomatoes are a New World food, and there is some debate about exactly where in the New World they came from. You can still find wild tomatoes in the Andes of Peru, but they were cultivated by around 700 AD all over Central and South America. But it's the Aztecs that we can thank for their modern English name, tomato, coming from the Aztec word tomatl. And it was just one of many New World ingredients that the Spanish conquistadors snapped up and took back with them to Europe. But once they got there, tomatoes got some mixed reviews. Italian herbalist Pietro Andrea Mattioli, who called it the apple of gold, or pomme d'or, where the Italians get the word pomodoro, associated it with the mandrake, which was a biblical aphrodisiac. But before long, people began associating it with belladonna, or deadly nightshade, which was a popular poison at the time, and may have been the poison that Juliet took to appear dead at the end of the play. Not a great association. So it was time to give tomatoes a rebrand with a new scientific name. Unfortunately, the rebrand sucked, because the scientific name for tomatoes is Lycopersicon esculentum, or edible wolf peach. I'm guessing they did not workshop that name because it's not great. It's not great. And poor tomatoes' reputation took another hit when Europe's elite thought that it was killing them, because it kind of was. See, back in the 16th and 17th century, the elite of Europe were eating off of pewter plates with pewter forks and knives. Unfortunately, pewter has lead in it, which isn't enough to give you acute lead poisoning or anything like that unless you put some highly acidic foods on it, which leach the lead out rather quickly. And that is what tomatoes do. So, yeah. So it didn't take long for Northern Europeans to just completely abandon eating tomatoes. But they were still grown in abundance in Britain and the American colonies for decoration. They were kind of like the Christmas tree ornaments of an English garden, I suppose. But in Southern Europe, they must have looked around and seen the poorer people eating them, not on pewter plates, and they weren't dying, so they thought, maybe we'll give these things another shot. And by the end of the 18th century, they were all the rage in Italian cooking. And it must have been one of the descendants of those Italian cooks who finally brought eating the tomato to America. Though it took quite some time, which I've always thought was weird because just down the way in Mexico, they were eating them this entire time and like nobody in America noticed. I guess they were busy with smallpox and stuff. Anyway, in his book, The Tomato in America, Andrew Smith talks about the shabby reputation this future Bloody Mary ingredient had in the United States. I have two favorite quotes from the book where people are throwing shade on this not-so-deadly nightshade. The first comes from Pennsylvanian J.B. Garber. Hardly 2 persons in 100 on first tasting it thought they would ever be induced to taste that sour trash a second time. And as if taking Garber up on some sort of dare, S.D. Wilcox of the Florida Agriculturalist decided to make his own tomato pie, afterwards calling it an arrant humbug and deserved forthwith to be consigned to the tomb of all the Capulets. Here we are again with that Romeo and Juliet thing, see? Must have been a fan. But then a miracle happened back in old Napoli. See, the poor of Naples had been putting tomatoes on their flatbreads for years. Then one day in the 1880s, while serving Queen Margherita of Savoy, Raffaele Esposito added in basil and mozzarella. The Queen loved it, the people loved it, everyone loved it, and finally they brought it over to America to change the face of our nation forever to one filled with pizza parlors. So that's it, everything's hunky-dory. Not poisonous, goes on pizza, tomatoes are in like Flint. Almost. See, there was still that age-old question of, is a tomato a fruit or a vegetable? Well, botanically speaking, it is a fruit. It is a plant's seed-bearing structure. End of debate, case closed. Not so fast, counselor, I object. Because according to the United States Supreme Court, a tomato is a vegetable.
No!
See, the Tariff Act of 1883 required a tax to be put on any imported vegetables, but not fruit. So when the state of New York slapped a tariff on a shipment of incoming Caribbean tomatoes destined for John Nix and Company, Mr. Nix filed a lawsuit claiming that tomatoes are a fruit, because they are. So the case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and in 1893, after what seems like a lot of lawyers reading the definitions of fruits and vegetables from varying dictionaries, Justice Horace Gray wrote an opinion stating, "Botanically speaking, tomatoes are the fruit of a vine, just as are cucumbers, squashes, beans, and peas. But in the common language of the people, whether sellers or consumers of provisions, all these are vegetables." But lucky for us, the pizza parlors of America were not deterred, just as I will not be deterred from making the rest of this recipe. So now that your filling is ready, go ahead and cut the tops off of your tomatoes and scoop out the inside with a spoon. Then go ahead and stuff the tomatoes as full as you can. Now the recipe says to fry these, and I'm going to do that, but they do have raw egg in them, so I also ended up putting them into the oven for just a few minutes, about 10 minutes, because the center was not getting to the temperature that you need to cook egg. So if you're worried about raw egg, go ahead and turn your oven on to 350 Fahrenheit or 175 Celsius. Then take out a frying pan and pour some olive oil in it, and turn it on to medium heat. Once the oil is nice and hot, set the stuffed tomatoes into the oil and let them cook for about 2 minutes, which will let them get some char on the bottom. Then flip them over and cook the tops for 2 or 3 minutes as well. At this point, you're going to put that whole pan into the oven for about 10 to 12 minutes, but if you want, you can do like I did and add a little extra cheese on top because why not? After about 10 minutes in the oven, pull them out, plate them up, and go ahead and serve. Et voila! Though that's French, I don't know what, and here it is in Italian. Anyway, here are our tomatoes. They are gorgeous, and they smell so good. There's a little sweetness to the scent, but then you can also smell the herbs, which is really nice, and a little char, which I like. So here we go. Get a lot of filling here. More filling. That is wonderful. Oh, it's perfect for summer. The ham actually really comes through, that kind of that salty ham flavor. But then the herbs are really what you're tasting. The tomato, of course, you're tasting as well, but because we scooped out the inside, it's not as overpowering of a tomato flavor unless you're getting a really big bite of the outside. But oh, they are lovely and not that hard. I think if you're making like a heavy pasta dish or something and looking for a lighter appetizer, this is the way to go. Really not that hard and just lovely for summer. Anyway, if you do end up making them, I would love to see pictures, so make sure to tag me on Instagram or Twitter. My handles are down in the description, and I will see you next time on Tasting History.